Hi, everybody. So, as you can see, your reading was about international law, and yet your lecture, the sort of class on your own today, is going to be about the nation state. And the reason why is because I feel like I can cover most of international law that we need to talk about on Monday when we talk about our second day of international law. And I kind of skipped over this, and this is a relatively important part of global governance because essentially I've been talking about global governance this whole time as this collection of roommates on Earth. And essentially, when we're talking about the nation state, we're really asking the question, okay, in our analogy, what exactly is a roommate? What exactly are these things that have power and influence and the ability to make decisions and change behaviors to get things that we want to see happen? So we just kind of have to crack open what the nation state is really fast. We're not going to go too in depth on this. We're really just going to talk about what actually this thing is that we essentially call a roommate or a nation state. And then we're going to talk about, are there other possibilities? What's the future of the nation state? Is it going to keep going on like this system, or are we going to see a different system coming up? So where I want to start is with the nation state. Now, here's the basic idea. All humanity in the world right now is organized into teams. And these teams are essentially nation states. Now, this has not always been the case. Human beings have organized themselves differently throughout history. They probably will do it differently in the future. But for right now, at least for the last couple hundred years, essentially humanity has been in teams. And your identity in the world is really based on which team you belong to. So because I happen to be an American citizen with an American passport, like that is sort of my identity out there, at least my legal identity globally. It doesn't matter what my race is, it doesn't matter what my gender is, my ethnicity, my anything like that, my religion. What matters is where my passport is from. That's sort of my legal identity, and that's how humanity is organized, that's how power is organized, that's how the system is organized. It is a states system. And it's made up these things called nation state. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at both of these things. We don't often use the phrase nation state when we're talking about it. We talk about things like country, or maybe we just say the word like state. But nation state's what we mean. And here's what we mean. Who gets a state? And every nation gets a state. What's a nation? A nation is a thing that gets a state. I know it's completely confusing and circular, but that's kind of how this works. So let's crack this open. Let's talk about what a state is first. The state is the governmental complex of that whole thing we're calling a nation state. There are some things that make a state a state. If you don't have any of these things, you're probably not a state in the sense that we mean. So the state is defined largely by three characteristics. And then I'm going to make that messy with a fourth thing. But for now, there's three large characteristics. The first one is a monopoly on violence. All the violence that is legal to use in the world can only be done by states. It's one of the reasons why we have such a problem with terrorist organizations. They are a non-state actor using violence. That ain't cool. There's a lot of reasons we have a problem with terrorist organizations, but that's sort of the legal reason why we have problems with it. If the state authorizes use of force, it's authorized, it's legal. So for example, if the government of the United States says, if somebody doesn't pay their taxes, the police can bring them into jail. So what if the police actually use force to bring me into jail, use violence to bring me into jail? The answer is, that's completely illegal. The state has said, this is where we're allowed to use force. Now, what if I decide that I want to bring you in because I don't like what you're doing, and I use force to do that? Not legal. The state has the monopoly on violence. So a police is authorized by the state, a police officer is authorized by the state to use violence. I am not. I'm not allowed to use violence. What if you really piss me off? I'm still not allowed to use violence. What if you killed one of my family members? Can I go get revenge? Nope, not allowed to do that. Can the state? Absolutely. So that monopoly on violence is sort of the first idea there. The second idea is that there is a centralized bureaucracy, what we might call a government. There is some apparatus, some institutional setup, a centralized bureaucracy that can sort of run this machine. We just usually use the term government, but that just begs the question, what do we mean when we say government? But those two things. The third thing that we need is you need a clear demarcated territory. This really does separate states from a bunch of other things we've had in the past which haven't had clear demarcated territory. But this essentially means, here's the border. Here's the United States, here's Mexico. If I take a step across that line, U.S. laws no longer count. That's just 12 inches. I just walked one step across the line, all of a sudden the Constitution doesn't work anymore. If I take a step back over here, it totally does. These clear demarcated territory. We use this idea of borders. There's a sharp division. There's no overlap in territory. It's not like, South San Diego is sort of governed over by the United States and Mexico. It's one or the other. Which also then means, and again, this goes back to the point I was making earlier about your identity in the world, it also means there's a well-defined citizenry. In other words, it's clear who is a citizen and who is not. That's a really big part of this. One of the reasons why immigration is such a big question mark in a lot of states where they have conversations about migration, immigration, emigration, all that kind of stuff. So these are the elements that make up a state today. This is sort of the key ideas. Now, here's the messy part. That is the theoretical argument. If you were in class, you would say, here are the 3 definitions of a state. The reality is it's kind of based on this, but a state is a state if other states treat it like a state. So even if it doesn't really have these things, if other states treat it like a state, it's still a state. I might think of, for example, a society in which there's a civil war going on. The state, by definition, doesn't have the monopoly on violence, and yet if other states say, yeah, you're still the state, then it still is the state. Okay, so that's one element of this thing. Another way you might phrase this, if we're sticking with our analogy, is a roommate if the other roommates call it a roommate. Okay, so I'm going to come back in a second and talk about what the nation element is.